From the Aspen Institute in Aspen, Colorado, this is day 2 of the 2020 Aspen Ideas Festival. From the Institute campus, please welcome again co-founder of the Aspen Ideas Festival, Vice President of Public Programs for the Aspen Institute, Kitty Boone.
Hello, and welcome to day 2 of the Aspen Ideas Festival. I'm Kitty Boone with the Aspen Institute. I'm standing in the Marble Garden, one of the many sculptural designs that define the campus of the Aspen Institute here in Aspen, Colorado. It was designed by Bauhaus master Herbert Bayer. For 70 years, the biggest thinkers in the world have been gathering here in Aspen to talk about humanity's place in the world and its biggest problem, and how society might address them. We've explored concepts from the quantum to the cosmic, from the personal to the global. We've debated the artistic, the politic, and the scientific. For the last 16 years, we've hosted the Aspen Ideas Festival every June. Our goal has always been to explore the most important topics of our times and convene the most interesting experts we can find to address them. We explore them openly, candidly, and in a nonpartisan way, bound only by a mission to advance society towards equality and justice. That mission is even more important today. As we will hear tonight, the art of listening well is a mark of leadership, one we can all embrace, especially now. I'm proud to be here, and I'm delighted to introduce you to night 2 of Aspen Ideas Festival. Welcome.
Day 2 will feature additional big ideas, a poem recited by an Aspen Words youth, and riveting conversations between Kai-Fu Lee and Nicholas Thompson, Maria Ressa and Lulu Garcia Navarro, as well as retired Naval Admiral William McRaven and Andrea Mitchell. And also, an exclusive presentation and performance by the Ideas Festival's dear friend, John Batiste. Typically, we kick off the festival with a series of big ideas when we are all gathered together in the Greenwald Pavilion.
So my idea, not so big, but just, big enough to you, is this. Let's start treating museums as the R&D departments of society.
And the kind of bickering we see today is not only unproductive, it's cowardly. If you don't have the guts to focus on ideas and stop tearing down individuals, you belong in the stands, not on the field.
This year, we've asked leaders to send us their big idea digitally. Day 2 kicks off with this big idea.
I'm Dr. Adora Okoli, internal medicine resident physician at Tulane University in New Orleans. One of the things I love about being a medical doctor is the connection that I have with my patients. In 2014, I contracted Ebola from a patient in Lagos, Nigeria. I was in isolation for 2 weeks, but I never saw the face of the doctor who treated me. With it came fear and loneliness. Now, as a doctor treating COVID-19 patients in New Orleans, I see that same fear in their faces, but they can't see mine because I'm behind protective equipment. Human contact is limited not only during times of pandemic. Even in normal times, doctors spend more time with electronic health records than the patients they describe. Here's my big idea. As we reimagine what healthcare will look like post-COVID-19 pandemic, let us make sure we place the human face and interaction at the very center of our medical care. Because human connection can sometimes be the best medicine. Thank you.
And now, our first Aspen Ideas conversation for day 2, Nick Thompson and Kai-Fu Lee.
Hello, I'm Nicholas Thompson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Wired. I'm joined here with Kai-Fu Lee. He's the president and chairman of Sinovation Ventures and one of the founders of the field of artificial intelligence. Kai-Fu, it's such a pleasure to see you.
Great to see you, Nick.
So you're one of the inventors of artificial intelligence. You wrote my favorite book on artificial intelligence. You've taught us all a lot about artificial intelligence. And now we have perhaps the greatest crisis of our lifetime across the world. And you've given AI a B- in helping to resolve it. Why is that? Why such a low grade?
Well, B- is a lot better than passing. It's not ideal. The reason is AI works by accumulating a lot of data and seeing recurrence of similar events in order to make accurate predictions. And pandemic is once a century activity. There isn't a lot of experience building models, and there isn't a lot of data. Despite that, there are many places where AI has added value, so therefore the B minus.
So why don't you walk us through the places where artificial intelligence has been helpful in combating the coronavirus and the places where it hasn't really done that much?
Two personal examples. I live in China, and contact tracing is working quite well. I get a red, yellow, and green signal on my phone telling me whether may have been in contact with someone who has the virus and therefore need to do a checkup. That is a way of informing people about the status. Second thing is I was in quarantine when I returned to Beijing, and all the things I ordered by e-commerce, takeout food were delivered by robot. So I was really in zero contact with people because robotics is now working well enough within structured environments like apartment buildings, hospitals, and stores and office buildings, doing things like temperature checking. Also, AI has made some contributions in helping drug discovery, discovering new antivirus vaccines, and also AI has been used in warehouses to do the massive number of packages that are sent by e-commerce. So these are some of the contributions that we see. Of course, there are also prediction engines. Early on, there was a company called Blue Dot that actually predicted that there may be a serious pandemic coming. Of course, it wasn't released to the world, but I think in the future, now that we've seen the damage of a pandemic, I think that if there is a next pandemic or a second wave, the predictions will be much more accurate.
One of the areas where people may have expected AI to be very useful where it hasn't been has been in vaccine development. There are a few examples. For example, Moderna, when they were trying to figure out which protein to build a potential vaccine, did use AI to model a series of options. But we did not have what many people hoped we'd have, which is the ability to simulate a human being and to identify potential vaccines. How far away are we from that?
I think that's impossible to predict right now. We're in a very urgent situation. So all the people working on vaccine development are using the low-hanging fruits. So they're not really going all out for that. One company we invested in called In Silico Medicine used generative chemistry aided by AI to predict the types of compounds that may block the spread of the virus. So there are similar techniques to that, basically retargeting existing AI technologies in places that are low-hanging fruits. I think what you're talking about really a brand new way of doing vaccine development. Hopefully the pandemic will give us a running start and we'll make progress towards that, but it would be, I think, too aggressive to predict that this will be a huge difference made by AI this time.
But what I mean is, how high is the fruit, right? So will the next pandemic, will we be able to very quickly develop a vaccine because of AI? Will it take 10 years till we're there?
Well, I'm going to be an optimist and say yes, but I really don't have the solid grounding to prove that.
Well, if anybody's predictions have some value, yours probably have some predictive value in them. Let's talk a little bit about the industries that are going to change. So one thing that is going to happen with the coronavirus is it's going to turn our economy upside down. It's changing all kinds of industry. It's massively changing my industry, media, right? It's changing online education in crazy ways. It's changing telemedicine in fascinating ways. What are the industries that you think will change and will be most affected by artificial intelligence?
Clearly, healthcare is one because of the huge focus on healthcare. And also, I think historically, healthcare was developed with largely optimization for people to be the doctors and the scientists inventing the medicine, deciding diagnosis. But yet, AI has so much to offer in terms of personalized, targeted diagnosis, more accurate due to genome sequencing, new technologies like CRISPR coming out, potentially combined with AI. And also, there are a lot of inefficiencies in healthcare. Insurance were not designed with all the healthcare data. So I think all of these will compound and make healthcare plus AI the biggest potential. And there is one issue with healthcare, which is whether the data can become accessible. In countries where there are strong protection, such as the HIPAA, even with anonymized data, it may be hard to aggregate the data for training AI. And AI really runs on data. So that will be an issue that each country and each company has to figure out. Another is education that you talked about. People are changing their habits about going to school. 1 billion kids are across the world learning online. And suddenly we see all these ways of using online AI technologies, whether it's AI teachers, AI to help you fix your pronunciation, AI to figure out what areas you're having trouble in math or English. That can all be added to make the human-to-human interaction more about learning the methods, helping to motivate learning, individualized, but using AI for the routine part of education. Lastly, I think work as a general category is shifting online. We're conducting all of our meetings, we're making investments potentially without even ever meeting the entrepreneur, and people are making deals online. So this change of habit of being willing to have meetings and make decisions and helping to change the work process into a digitized process. This digitalization turns everything into data. And once you have data, you have AI potentially coming in to improve the margins, improve the efficiency, and also a huge potential challenge is you have AI potentially coming in to say, well, everything's digitalized. Why don't we use AI to do this workload instead of people? So that it will accelerate automation and potentially cause a faster churn in terms of AI replacing people.
So this is fascinating. So right now you and I are talking across screens. You're on the other side of the world. I'm in an attic in upstate New York. We should be in Aspen talking to each other, but here we are. It's all digital. So the fact that this conversation is all digital and all the other work conversations I've had today and we'll have tomorrow are all digital, you think will lead to some kind of unknown advance in AI that will make human work disappear more quickly?
Yes, to give you an example, in the pre-pandemic world, there are lots of companies that require people-to-people interaction. So people go to work, they have meetings, people take notes, they write on paper, and they have records, and they call each other. But now that all the work is essentially operated and run online, then everything from meetings to decisions to workflow becomes digital. And once it's digital, the company's management will see, oh, there's that part of expense report decision making that could be done by AI. There's that part of customer service. We could simply have an AI agent rather than human agent. Oh, the sales process, all this telesales could be done by AI with either automated speech generation synthesis or even synthesis of digital humans. So pieces of corporation and their workflow will become automated faster because it's already online and digital.
So in your book, AI Superpowers, and let me just pause for a little PSA here. If anybody is watching, you have not bought Kai-Fu Lee's book, AI Superpowers, you should, it's superb. In your book, you talk about the future of work and you have two charts. And one of them is about job and workforce. And you say that you have an y-axis, which is human interaction, and an x-axis, which is creativity. And so a job that requires a lot of creativity and a lot of human interaction is not likely to be replaced by machines, like a CEO job. And a job that has not a lot of creativity and not a lot of human interaction, like a telemarketer, will be replaced by machines. How does your chart change with the post-coronavirus era?
I think the chart basically remains the same. Basically replacement curve, if you will, taking over the jobs, that's going to go faster. I also think the pandemic will potentially cause certain types of jobs to be more accelerated in their replacement, because we would think healthcare, hospital jobs, we would want the human touch, empathy, etc. But human touch in the period of a pandemic increases the likelihood of spreading of the virus. So if there were a smart robot that could move medical supplies and maybe help the patients with some testing their blood pressure, etc., we would be, I think we as humanity would be more willing to embrace that. Similarly, waiters and waitresses in restaurants, we would think there's value in the human interaction. However, those are dangerous jobs to have, and certainly at the fast food and lower cost restaurants, they will be more replaced by automation and AI. And actually in China, in many of the lower cost restaurants, you see people taking orders on mobile phones, and the waiter waitresses are just delivering the food, and you'll also pay on your phones. So that already reduces the cost. And there are also many restaurants that have AI robots delivering the food, because the restaurant, like the apartment building and the hospital, are structured environments. Robotics moving around in a structured environment is much easier. These are not robots that have feet and hand. They think of them as just carts that basically move to your table, make some sound to let you know to take your own ordered food to your table. So those kinds of jobs that we would think require some human interaction are potentially going to turn into automated jobs faster because of the pandemic.
Do you think, using a similar logic, that we're soon going to have self-driving taxis, or that the move towards self-driving vehicles will be accelerated because we don't want to be near human drivers?
Not as much, because in order to get to the L5, which is the highest of the 5 level of autonomous vehicle, there's still a lot of technical challenges to be overcome. So I think the taxis and Uber will continue to be needed. We will see AI taking over, automating human jobs in the warehouse, some of the manufacturing, driving on highways and buses, probably in that order. The taxi and Uber will be the last to be fully automated.
And I just want to make sure I fully understand your argument, which is, we've all known that AI and robotics will be replacing human jobs, but there are two factors here that are accelerating it. One, we don't want as much human interaction, right? We don't want to be near the waiter. And two, so much more of our life is digitized and AI runs off data. Is that correct? Is there a third factor, or just those two?
No, I think those are the two main factors from the pandemic.
Let me ask you about something you mentioned a few minutes before. You were talking about healthcare and data and HIPAA, and you mentioned that countries that have strong healthcare regulations, like the United States, won't have as much data, and therefore may not have as many advances in artificial intelligence. My view is that we're going to care a lot less about privacy in the future than we do now. So perhaps actually countries like the United States will start loosening up access to data, for better or for worse. Is that fair?
I think that would be a plausible outcome, because I think people are starting to realize privacy is not a binary issue. It's also not an issue that trumps everything else. It needs to be considered in the context of public health, greater social good, and personal security. So while we want everyone to have their privacy not being taken away by companies, etc., as much as possible, but when it provides a solution to the public health or greater security for each individual, and perhaps some incredible convenience for people, then we should really consider it in the context of how much benefit it is providing, and provide each person with some degree of choice, because there will always be people who feel privacy is the most important. So to the extent that each country develops a set of regulations that maintains what I said above, then the appropriate amount of data collection, anonymized data, can be aggregated and AI can be trained.
China is quite a few months ahead of the United States in its response to the coronavirus. They're clearly on different paths, on different cycles. The United States has not done as good a job at knocking it out after it first came. Tell us what we have to expect, assuming we eventually get on the China trajectory. What do we have to expect in terms of AI and technology that will come along the way?
There are many things that are fundamentally cultural and very difficult. I think China has gone through SARS, as have many Asian countries, and therefore, and also culturally speaking, people are more willing to be disciplined for their own safety and for the safety of the society. That's going to be hard to change until a country has experienced some of the challenges. But some of the possibly doable things include, I think, certainly contact tracing based on an understanding that privacy is important, but public health is equally or maybe even more important. Secondly, when there is a significant spread, actually wearing masks is important, but it's really most important when everyone wears it. So when it's purely voluntary, it's not going to be as effective. So when pandemic was in a serious situation in China and other Asian countries, you go on the street, everyone's wearing a mask because of the purpose of the mask is mostly not to protect you, but to protect other people in case you have it. Therefore, everyone has to wear it. These, I think, are the two biggest things in case there is a continuing challenge or a second wave. If people would do that and get it close to zero, then actually the new normal, as we see in China today, is not that far from normal.
Well, actually, of the things that you've described in this conversation, I'm fine with wearing a mask. I'm fine with contact tracing, but I do really look forward to the robot delivering my dinner.
Well, that actually works incredibly well. It's a little bit related to how people live. Most people, like myself in China, live in urban condo or apartment buildings. That makes the robot delivery much easier. You've got the delivery from the restaurant to the apartment building. Then the apartment building manager handles delivering the last mile from the first floor to your apartment. Because in the US, most people live in houses, it's a little more complex because then the robot has to figure out how to deal with the last mile.
Yeah, well, ideally with the right AI and the right robot engineering, we can solve those problems. Thank you so much, Kai-Fu Lee. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for your insights and all of the wonderful things you said.
Well, thank you, Nick.
Kitty kicked off the day in the Marble Garden. That is where we invite you for this campus tour. Herbert Bayer created the Marble Garden in 1955 with some help from Elizabeth Pepke, his friend and longtime patron. The marble pieces were discards, reclaimed from an abandoned quarry in nearby Marble, Colorado, which also provided material for the Lincoln Memorial and other national monuments. The garden is an assemblage piece from found objects, a work of balance and interaction that achieves harmony in spite of the imperfections of the individual elements. The interplay of rough and smooth and that stark, luminous white echo the crags of the surrounding peaks. The Aspen Ideas Festival is generously underwritten by Allstate, the Mount Sinai Health System, Prudential, and the Walton Family Foundation, with support from PayPal and the Rise Fund. And now, another big idea.
I'm Sandy Spiker, CEO of IDEO, and my big idea is that we use design to reimagine our foundational systems for a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable world. The mechanisms our society relies upon are out of whack. Our criminal justice system was built to protect some people and not others. Supply chains are optimized for profit, not the planet. So many of our foundational systems, healthcare, education, food, were not designed to address the scale of all people's needs. What if we could design systems that actually cared for people and the planet? Design can help. Design can help elevate and integrate the diverse perspectives that comprise our society, especially when everyone is involved in that process. This moment of nested crises calls for the braveness of our imagination, not to get us back to the way things used to be, but to create a new era that works better for many, many more of us.
Up next, Lulu Garcia Navarro, and from her home in the Philippines, Maria Ressa.
Hi, I'm Lulu Garcia Navarro, host of Weekend Edition Sunday and the podcast Up First from NPR News. And I am joined today by journalist Maria Ressa. She is the co-founder of the independent news site Rappler, a prominent news outlet in the Philippines. She is a crusader for freedom of the press, which has earned her the ire of President Rodrigo Duterte, whose government has convicted Ms. Ressa this month of cyber libel after a year-long trial. She's out on bail, but I am pleased and I must say honored to welcome her here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Lulu. Thanks for having me.
You face up to 6 years in prison, but you can still appeal the decision. I'd like to first ask you how you're feeling right now.
You know, I've gone through the whole range of emotions. And after, where do I go? Where do I start? I mean, really, I'm angry, and then I'm sad. I'm just deeply sad that this is where we are today as a nation. But beyond that, I am just determined that this is not going to intimidate me, that I'm going to call it out and to kind of demand better. We're definitely appealing. But in terms of what you said, 6 years, well, look, I have 8 criminal charges against me.
I was about to say.
Together, the maximum, if you put all the jail sentences together, it's almost 100 years. So I think I've been living in this upside down world for 4 years now. I keep hoping that I'll wake up.
I want to refresh people's memory here just about when this all started. You caught Duterte's attention because of a tweet, as I understand it, which seems very 2020, even though this was much earlier. But also a lot of deep investigative work because of Duterte's war on drugs. Remind me of the work that you had been doing when this all started.
So the tweet was a response to President Duterte's attack against us during his State of the Nation address. So he didn't attack us at a random press conference. It was his State of the Nation address in 2017. But part of the reason, I think what's happened to us is happening to you in the United States, right? What happened first is in 2016, we challenged impunity. President Duterte took office in May. Within hours of taking his oath, the first deaths in the drug war, this very brutal drug war, which our Commission on Human Rights says has killed at least 27,000 people. The police themselves admit that it is nearer to about 7,000 or 8,000 people. Regardless, the first casualty in our battle for truth is the number of people killed. How can we not know that, right? So we challenged this. We did an impunity series. The government kept changing the numbers, and we kept reminding them of what they actually said. And the second level of impunity that we challenged is our government's propaganda war and the enabler impunity of Facebook in the Philippines, because Facebook essentially is our internet. 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. We did these series. We did a propaganda war series. That was in October. The first was called Weaponizing the Internet. The second of this 3-part series was how Facebook algorithms impact democracy. The third was Manufactured Consensus. We looked at 26 fake accounts and how they influenced. We manually counted how many other accounts they influenced. Almost 3 million others, right? Once we published this propaganda war series, I wrote 2 of those 3 parts. We were inundated. I had an average of 90 hate messages per hour. And that's when I realized, oh my God, this is a new weapon. And when we began collecting data and looking at the data, we also found that women were targeted 10 times, at least 10 times more than men.
Let me just briefly touch on this cyber libel that you are being charged under this time and have been convicted. Can you explain what that is? It's part of this kind of wider phenomenon of fake news legislation that we're seeing, where governments around the world are trying to say that legitimate journalism is somehow propaganda, is somehow libelous.
Yes, this is correct. Unfortunately, the cyber libel law was enacted into law in 2012, so earlier than this administration. But let me just point out two things. The story we published was published before this law had been enacted. So it's a retroactive application of the law. In order to perform the legal acrobatics to even get this case to court, they actually did two major legal moves that will impact every Filipino. The first is they changed the statute of limitations for libel from 1 year to 12 years. 1 year to 12 years, right? That was the first. The second is huge. In 2014, so 2 years after we published the story, someone in Rappler saw there was a typographical error. One letter in one word was changed. Based on that, the Judge Montesa, said, well, that's republication, and now you can be tried retroactively under the cybercrime law. So essentially, because someone's a grammar Nazi in Rappler, I and Ray Santos can go to jail for up to 6 years. Of course, these are some of the main issues we'll be challenging. They weren't really addressed in the verdict at all. And here's the kicker. The government's own lawyers, the cybercrime division of what our equivalent of the FBI, threw this case out precisely because the statute of limitations had ended. I'm just shocked.
And throughout this, it's been getting a lot of attention. I want to ask you, first of all, about a lot of the support that you've received around the world. Your lawyer is pretty well known herself, Amal Clooney. How did that come about? How did she and you link up for this?
A year ago, in April of 2019, the Clooney Foundation asked me to be one of the panelists at the launch of Trial Watch, which are court observers. It's precisely set up for when journalists or human rights activists when the law is weaponized against them. We met upstairs in the dean's office. I think it was at Columbia Law School. And Amal immediately takes the chair behind the desk, and starts outlining, Maria, this is what's going to happen. And at that point, she was negotiating with the Myanmar government to release the Reuters journalists, right? And we had just gotten news that the government had taken a hardline stance. But at that point, she said that they would be released within 2 weeks. And, she was right? So anyway, she lays out what's about to happen to me. And that's also part of the reason that particular day was very important in terms of
understanding. I want to ask you, because she now is asking the U.S. government to take action to protect you as a U.S. citizen, because you are a U.S. citizen. Have you been given any indication that the U.S. government will intervene? What would you like to see them do, briefly?
It's really hard for me to say that, because anything I tell you will be used against me by the Philippine government. I think that everyone who cares about freedom and democracy, governments in particular, should be standing up, because not enough governments are talking about the values behind democracy, right? Everything has become situational. And the worst case, of course, is, the reaction to the death of Jamal Khashoggi. So it's hard for me to say. I don't know where help will come from, but I have been surprised by the outpouring of support. But simultaneously to that, I am being attacked and clobbered on social media. The government has launched a very coordinated campaign along with journalists and former journalists who are allied with the government. So I'm
what does
trying
that look
to bat
like?
away all the lies.
What does that look like, practically speaking? Just for someone who might never face that, and I hope that most people don't. When you open your mentions, what is there?
Maybe in the morning, about 150. I can't even count them sometimes. But on Twitter, it's easier because these are newly formed accounts, and it's very easy to block. Facebook is difficult because their definition of inciting to hate is very different, right? When you say a lie in 2016, and then every year it keeps recurring, you say it exponentially in 2016, people believe it, right? So it's like a virus. They introduced the virus in 2016. The target are real people who begin to believe it. And even if you fact check those real people, they don't believe the facts. So I think this is the battle for truth. The other thing is, this is also very personal. You will never see everything I see because it's very targeted to me. And that's part of the reason I'm appealing to Facebook. Stop stripping away the protections that are guaranteed in the Philippine Constitution. Start moderating this. You know, it isn't our responsibility to protect ourselves on your platform. They should make sure that users are protected.
We only have a few minutes left, and I want to put this into a wider context and get your thoughts. This moment, we are seeing the press facing unprecedented pressures. Journalists are being targeted all over the world, as you've mentioned. From the brazen murder of Jamal Khashoggi by the Saudi government, as you mentioned, to the killing of journalists in Mexico. I think there's almost 40 this year by the drug gangs, to the threats here in the United States that journalists are facing. What is happening to you is part of a larger narrative, is it not?
The same thing is happening to all of us around the world. And let me just simplify that, right? Our information ecosystem has fundamentally changed. Journalists are no longer the gatekeepers. The tech platforms have taken that, but they've abdicated responsibility for the facts. And so now lies laced with anger and hate spread faster than facts, which are really boring. We spend our entire careers learning how to make them interesting, right? To tell good stories. When you have facts, when facts are debatable, when people can't agree on the facts, you cannot have integrity of markets, integrity of elections, your elections coming up. And you can't have democracy. I think the last thing I'd say, so we're attacked bottom up. And then when the leaders who were enabled, who were elected because of these platforms, are now coming top down, journalists are being sandwiched and people are believing the lies. There are two reasons why those lies have impact. Because they're targeted to you, you doubt yourself. That's the first step. Doubt yourself. Your credibility is eroded when other people see it, right? But the first part is pound you to silence. The second part is create a bandwagon effect, a fake bandwagon effect, so that other people are convinced. There's almost a dictator's playbook. We know in the US, let me talk about the US. We already know from the Mueller report and from the US Senate Intelligence Committee that released the data that Americans were targeted by Russian disinformation networks, right? That's documented. And one of the fracture lines of society that they targeted, these disinformation networks of the IRA and the GRU, the military intelligence, was Black Lives Matter, right? They targeted it on both sides. That hasn't stopped, and it has affected real people. Fast forward 4 years, and here you are in the United States, right? Leaders, instead of healing divisions, pound them open, supported by exponential attacks on social media that play to the worst of human nature. This has to stop because we will lose democracy.
That's Maria Ressa. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
And good luck.
This has been a difficult time. From social distancing to the absence of ritual, we are all adapting accordingly. We hope this reading of The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry, recited by Aspen Words Youth poet Grant Weimer, gives you some peace.
The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time, I rest in grace of the world, and and am free.
The Aspen Ideas Festival is generously underwritten by Allstate, the Mount Sinai Health System, Prudential, and the Walton Family Foundation, with support from PayPal and the Rise Fund. And now, another big idea.
Prudential was founded on the principle of equity, that financial security should be within reach for everyone. And yet, we haven't always been on the right side of history. Examining our past revealed business practices that we're not proud of, including those that negatively impacted Black Americans and other underserved communities. We know that while this is a part of our story, it does not have to be our legacy. My name is Latha Reddy, and I lead the Inclusive Solutions Organization at Prudential Financial. It's important for us to not only publicly own that history and apologize for it, but to work aggressively to close the enduring racial wealth gap that our practices further widened. We know we have much work to do and are prepared to be judged by our actions. And our actions are based on the recognition that systemic issues require systemic change. Our approach was forged in a crucible moment in the history of our hometown and headquarters of 145 years, Newark, New Jersey. After the civil unrest in 1967, we chose to stay in the city when other companies fled. We saw firsthand the impact of systemic racism, and we knew we wanted to be a part of the change, that we had to change. And we knew that that meant being consistent and in it for the long term. This ethos has informed how we show up for our employees, our customers, and neighbors across the country and the world. Getting the basics done right, day in and day out, for everyone, it's hard, it's slow moving, and it's often invisible, without any easy story to tell. So my big idea? Examine deeply how the institution you represent contributed to today's injustices, to understand how you can be part of systemic solutions now. So for us, it's about pulling all of the levers we have. We're a large employer and a product developer. We wield significant purchasing power and investment capital. At Prudential, we've used these levers to advocate for national paid family leave and retirement programs that work for small businesses. We've invested in product innovations to increase emergency savings for the financially fragile. We partner with faith-based organizations to deliver financial education in churches, meeting people where they are. And we invest in community organizations to bring partners together around a shared vision of inclusive growth that leaves no one behind. We cannot let another crisis cycle go by where we disregard our interconnectedness. Let's seize this opportunity to build back better through true collaborative efforts. We can emerge from this crisis more just, more prosperous, and more resilient if we roll up our sleeves together.
Up next, Andrea Mitchell with William McRaven.
I'm Andrea Mitchell of NBC News and MSNBC, and I'm joined now by Admiral Bill McRaven, retired Navy Admiral and former Chancellor of the University of Texas. Welcome, Admiral. Thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Great to be with you.
We're at a critical point in the nation. We're facing a triple threat, I would say. The pandemic, of course, the economic recession, a national reckoning on systemic racism. From what you've learned and written and taught about in your newest book, Sea Stories, and of course, Make Your Bed, what have you learned about leadership, how the nation can best address this crisis point?
Yeah, you know, of course, most of my adult life was spent in the Navy, 37 years in the Navy. And certainly the U.S. military, you know, hasn't gotten all of this right. We struggled from the early days, certainly my early days in the 70s, all the way up through to today. But the one thing the military does, I think, exceedingly well is they are very reflective. I know as a special operations guy, every time we go on a mission, as soon as the mission is complete, everybody kind of gets back in the Joint Operations Center and we critique ourselves to make sure we are doing absolutely the best we possibly can. And so when I think about how the military does business and whether or not this translates to the broader issues that we're grappling with today, a lot of this is about sitting down and saying, What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And how do we improve on where we are so that we can get better? And most of that, of course, has to do with listening. It is always kind of incumbent upon those of us that are leaders is to sit down and listen to not only the good news, but the bad news. Not only those things that make you feel good about what you've done, but those things that challenge whether or not you are doing them correctly. So again, this has just been kind of part and parcel to my life in the military. I think it served me well in the military. And then frankly, when I transitioned to be the chancellor at the University of Texas, there was also, certainly as I'm coming in new to higher education and healthcare, you have to spend a lot of time listening to people. And I would offer to those folks that are out there in those positions today, spend time listening first, be reflective, figure out what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right, and then move forward.
It's so interesting that you should say this, because I was just reading a manuscript of a forthcoming book by a career FBI colleague, and he talked about a hot wash, about always coming back from a mission and asking what went right, what went wrong. And it strikes me that I don't think that is part of police training. It's not universal.
Yeah, I can tell you from the police forces that I have spent time with in the past, it is. It's a daily routine. And when we talk about a hot wash, that's a hot wash up, so you're, right. Again, you're getting reflective, whether it's the FBI or certainly in my time with the University of Texas Police Department, which was 800 police officers that are on 14 different campuses around the state of Texas. And every time, an event happens, there is always an opportunity, once again, to be reflective, to say, did we do this right? Did we do the right procedures? The great thing I found about campus policing, and I think there are levels of policing and frankly, levels of how you have to adapt and deal with the people that you are trying to police, is campus policing is a very, very nuanced, very kind of community-based policing effort where the police have got to recognize they're dealing with young men and women that are 18 to 21 years old. They don't always make the right decisions. You have to be respectful of who they are, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you don't put them in a position where whatever they do that might be awkward at the time of being 19, somehow puts them on a bad path for the rest of their life. It is a very refined caliber of police work, and I can tell you, I always was amazed at how they took some of the more difficult challenges on the campuses and dealt with them very effectively. But when things didn't go well, and they didn't always go well, they absolutely came back and said, okay, what can we do better? Again, I can't speak for the rest of the police forces around the country, but this was something I know that I saw with the campus policing effort.
How does the military succeed so well in combining people from so many different backgrounds and creating a cohesive force?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm not sure we have always done it well. In fact, I know for a fact we have not always done it well. If you go back to the early 1900s, of course, we were a segregated force. Right. World War II comes along, and we still had segregated. The Tuskegee Airmen were separated and segregated. Then in 1948, Truman passes the integration. And what you saw was in the 50s, there was a marked increase in the number of minorities joining the service. The 60s, of course, accelerated this with the civil rights movement. But I came in the 70s. So when I first came in, of course, when you looked around the table, the wardroom or the goat locker, as we refer to it for the chief petty officers in the Navy, it was all white guys. As my 37, almost 40 years of service in the military evolved, you began to see this remarkable diversity coming into the wardroom. Now, again, are we where we need to be? No. But what you found with the diversity, of course, was you had, diversity of not only background and color and gender and orientation, but diversity of thought. And if you want to get to the best answer for a tough situation, you better have diversity around the room so you can get, all angles of the problem. And then, of course, after 9/11, on a more strategic basis, we had diversity from the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, intelligence communities, different backgrounds, service backgrounds, that also added to our ability to make better decisions. Diversity and opportunity are the key to, I think, everything that we have had successful in the military.
And in fact, that applies to other institutions as well.
Absolutely.
We now have had just confirmed recently the first African-American service chief. It's remarkable that it took that long, but how important is that in terms of role modeling and sensitivity and understanding different experiences to have a service chief who comes from the minority community?
Well, C.Q. Brown, irrespective of where he comes from, was the right person for the job. I've known him for several years. He is a remarkable officer. And while, I am sure he is absolutely proud of being the first African-American to serve in that service chief positions, I think it is going to be great for the young African-Americans and the minorities within the Air Force to be able to look up to see somebody like General Brown who has achieved that level. But he was the best person for the job. It was really that simple. And he's going to be a phenomenal Chief of Staff of the Air Force.
I want to ask you about the effect of the coronavirus on the Navy, because obviously it's hardest in the Navy to socially distance, and we've seen the effects with the USS Theodore Roosevelt. How does the Navy adjust to the threat of this pandemic and prepare for future pandemics?
Yeah, it is certainly challenging, Andrea, because as you mentioned, when you're talking about a ship or a submarine, which is even tighter quarters, it's just challenging in terms of, recognizing that if you have one individual on board with coronavirus, then the chances of it spreading quickly are going to be there. Now, the good news is, the Navy, again, because the military being the military, we will set protocols. They will not be optional protocols. So, when we say you will wear a mask and you will distance at 6 feet and you will do what is required, those orders will be followed in a way that hopefully will flatten the curve very quickly. Testing, trace testing, these sorts of things will become standard operating procedures. Now, does that mean that you will eliminate the coronavirus on board something like the Theodore Roosevelt or one of the big carriers or a submarine? Maybe not. And then that commanding officer is going to have to figure out how to fight that ship with the problems that they're dealing with within the crew. But I'm very confident that the military will figure that out, and it will not stop them from achieving any of their goals.
Since you've left Special Forces Command, there have been some notable difficulties in the last year or so, and the cases that we've seen, as well as command interference. How do you see the morale and the future of Special Forces as it evolves and adjusts?
Well, I came into the Navy SEALs in 1977, or actually 1978, by the time I got through SEAL training. And frankly, we were dealing with a lot of these sorts of problems post-Vietnam. You had men coming back from Vietnam that had some challenges from their time in Vietnam. Again, you had racial tension within the military. So the Navy has seen these sorts of discipline problems before. And at the end of the day, it really gets back to how do you reinstill the good order and discipline within the service. You do this once again by setting high standards, expecting people to maintain those high standards, and then holding people accountable when they fail to maintain those standards. It's not rocket science. It's not easy to do, but it's a fundamental formula that has worked well. What will happen is, again, we will go through these challenging times. I am confident we will kind of come out of this. We will get back up on a peak in terms of our professionalism, our ethical standards, our legal and moral standards. But I have no doubt that in the future it will happen again, and we will have to reassess, as I said at the beginning. It's what the military does very well. We reassess when things don't go right, and we figure out how are we going to move ahead, fix the problem, and get better.
And how do you protect the military from becoming politicized in such a polarized environment in our country?
I think General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, just did a marvelous thing recently where he came out and said, look, I made a mistake. I was asked the other day in talking to a number of students, when you're a leader and you make a mistake, how do you regain the trust of the men and women that work for you? And I said, it's easy. You'll look them in the eye, you tell them you made a mistake, you explain why you did what you did and how you're going to correct it, and then again, you move forward. And I think General Milley did that exceedingly well. You could tell he was passionate about it, he was sincere about it, and the men and women will follow any leader if they think they are sincere about the problems that they have grappled with and the mistakes they've made. So I don't worry about the morale within the service as long as we've got great leaders like Mark Milley in uniform, doing the right thing by the men and women in the service.
As you look around the world now, what worries you most, from North Korea to China to Russia to the continuing wars in Afghanistan and of course what's happening in Syria and Iraq and Iran?
When I was chancellor, I would have a lot of town hall meetings or meetings with our alumni, and that question always came up. And they would always ask it, and they would frame it and say, what's your number one national security issue? And I think my answer always surprised them. I said, K through 12 education. And they would say, no, I mean, what is your number one national security issue? I said, K through 12 education. And I stand by that. And it wasn't because I was chancellor. It was because I recognize that unless we are giving, again, opportunity and a quality education to the young men and women in the United States, then we won't have the right people to be able to make the right decisions about our national security. They won't have an understanding of different cultures. They won't have an understanding of different ideas. They won't be critical thinkers. So we have got to have an education system within the United States that really does, again, teach and educate the young men and women to think critically, to look outside, their kind of small microcosm. Because if we don't develop those great folks, then again, our national security in the long run may be in jeopardy.
And that brings us back to unequal opportunities from one school district to another, from one part of a city to another, in terms of not only the amount of money, but it's not always money, but the quality of teaching and the quality of infrastructure.
Yeah, what I found is you have to create a culture of education in these communities. In the state of Texas, of course, we have seen these pockets where the communities didn't embrace education because in many cases, they thought that, well, I can't afford it, or my child is not smart enough to be able to go to this school. When in fact, if you begin to create a culture of education within the community, then the young men and women will rise to the occasion if given the opportunity to go to a school. And there is a school out there for every man and woman in the United States. I don't care what your educational capacity is, what you think it is, there's a school that will help you matriculate to the point of getting a degree.
How concerned are you about what's happening during the COVID-19 in that in many places across the country, they don't have broadband, they don't have access to the online teaching, and perhaps because their parents are still working on the front lines and are not able to help with homeschooling, they're not getting the reinforcement at home that they need during this long stretch.
It is absolutely a problem. And I'm a faculty member at the LBJ School at the University of Texas. And even our graduate students, we recognize that taking the courses virtual, it just creates an entirely different dynamic. Now we're working through that, but to your point, Andrea, when you look at the societal challenges in areas where the young kids don't have broadband, they can't do distant learning, they can't do the virtual classroom, it is a problem. And it gets back to my point about K through 12 education. We have got to invest in K through 12 education to be able to buy down some of these social inequities, to be able to educate people on broader ideas. But right now in the middle of COVID, this is a problem. And I know the faculty and the teachers at the K through 12 level, they are spending a lot of time trying to do the very best they can to continue to educate the students of America.
When you look back over a storied career, as you've been writing about in Sea Stories and in other speeches you've given, what moments required the greatest challenges for you in terms of leadership? Was it Osama bin Laden?
No, not at all. I think there are always the personal challenges you're going to have. I mean, I failed a lot in my career. I hope at the end of the day, the successes outweigh the failures. But as a leader, you have to figure out a way to get past these failures, not just as a leader, I think, as anybody. I was fortunate on times when I stumbled. My wife, who we've been married for 42 years, She was able to pick me up, dust me off, say it's going to be okay, kind of keep moving. You need a battle buddy, as we say in the military, somebody that can pick you up when you fall and keep you heading in the right direction. The kind of moral dilemmas that you get as a leader, you find those challenges every single day, particularly when you're in a combat situation. You hope that your moral compass has been strong because you have honed it and refined it over decades of being in leadership positions, but you don't always get it right. And again, you continue to make mistakes. The one thing I would offer before we break from here, I've said it before, but I'm the biggest fan of the millennials you'll ever meet. And I think that surprises a lot of people because there is this narrative out there that the millennials are these, these entitled, these soft, these little snowflakes. Well, then I'm always quick to point out that you've never seen them in a firefight in Afghanistan, or you've never seen them trying to make a better life for themselves going to one of our great schools in the state of Texas. This is a remarkable generation. They're not a lot like my generation. In many ways, they are better. They care, so much about their friends. They care about the issues. They question things in a way that I'm not sure we baby boomers question. They will take a stand on issues. And so whenever, I get a little bit concerned about the direction of the country, I just have to reflect back on these, in my time, these great soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and civilians that I worked with, particularly the younger generation, and know that, we're going to be okay.
And when you think about all of the changes, the role of women in the military has evolved so rapidly since, and the whole issue of don't ask, don't tell, and the transition to having openly gay members in the military, that diversity as well has made a big difference in the force.
The thing about the military is, while again, it is not a perfect meritocracy, and I don't know that it will ever be a perfect meritocracy, there is always this recognition that, as we say in the SEAL teams, look, just if you can carry your rucksack, if you can do your job, we want you as part of the team. And it doesn't mean that, we're gonna make things easy on anybody, but we want you to come in and do your job to the best ability, to the best of your ability, irrespective of whether, you're a man, a woman, gay, transgender. It doesn't make a difference. If you can do your job and you can help get the mission accomplished, come on, we're happy to have you. And as long as there is that attitude, then I think we're going to be fine. When we begin to kind of subdivide the people that are sitting around the table, and we question whether or not they have the capability to do the job before we even give them the opportunity to show that they can do the job, well, that's a shortfall that we have to overcome.
Despite all of the crises and the reasons why people are protesting, appropriate reasons for protesting peacefully, are you optimistic?
I'm always optimistic. You have to be optimistic. For all the problems we have had in this country, I still contend we are the greatest country in the world. And if you can look at where we are now and know that because of the protests, because of the changes I see coming, we're going to be better. We're going to be better next year. We're going to be better 10 years from now. We're going to be better 100 years from now. And this is, I mean, again, it's tough now, but if you can kind of get past this veil of darkness and look past it, I think what you see is more promise in the future. Doesn't mean that the next year or so isn't going to be difficult, but I remain optimistic because once again, I've seen the young men and women that are coming up that are going to take the place of us old guys out there, and there's some remarkable Americans, and I'm proud of what they're doing. Don't agree with everything, but I'm proud of what they're doing, and I think it will make for a better country in the future.
It's an honor and a privilege to be talking to you today, and thank you so much for participating in the Aspen Ideas Festival. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Finally today, a special treat. Someone who exudes optimism as well, a dear friend of the Aspen Ideas Festival, band leader of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and co-artistic director of the National Jazz Museum, musician Jon Batiste.
Hello, my name is John Batiste, and it's a pleasure to be with you again virtually this year. The Aspen Institute has hosted me, and I've had a great time sharing my ideas there. From the talk on meditation and music and the power of music to heal and to give people therapy and catharsis, to the idea that music is a continuum and also represents the greatest ideals of democracy. I've had talks about the greatness of Louis Armstrong, and with Wynton Marsalis, we've talked about the genius of jazz. And I decided this year that I wanted to give a microcosm of all those talks in one by playing some music for you. So, first I would like you to join me in a meditation. This is a song that I composed entitled Don't Stop. And this is a meditation for you to deal with whatever difficulty you may be facing in this tumultuous time. And remember that there's always a silver lining if we don't stop. When it comes to loving me, don't stop. I know there ain't no guarantees, but don't stop. Let's keep it shaking while we can. You don't need another man. We'll be rolling with the plan. Don't stop. When it's near to closing time, don't stop. Just put your hand in mine, don't stop. This train has left the station, and who knows what destination. This love is for the taking, don't stop. Don't stop dreaming. Don't stop believing. 'Cause you know that our time is coming up. So with all you've got, don't stop. There's a reason that you're here, don't stop. You ain't got nothing to fear, so don't stop. This train has left the station, and who knows what destination. This love is for the taking, don't stop. Don't stop dreaming. Don't stop believing. 'Cause you know that our time is coming up. Let's soak up the day and dance the night away. So with all you've got, don't stop. So with all you've got, don't stop. One thing we discussed in that talk was the idea that music has the power to focus your attention. And what better way to come up with great ideas than to have a strength of intention. I've written about that in my role as the musical director of the Atlantic. The great Jeffrey Goldberg, another Aspen Institute alum and family member. And the power for transformation, taking any song and putting it into the context of a meditation or a prayer. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies and amber waves of grain. Oh, purple mountain majesties above the fruited plains. America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, ooh, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. One other great thing that I had the pleasure of exploring at the Aspen Institute in years past is my symphony, the American Symphony. One piece of work that combines the orchestra with the marching band, with also the current contemporized jazz ensemble, which includes hip hop, reggaeton, and all types of different contemporary styles within the jazz context, as well as a chorus. The chorus forms the conscience of the piece. It forms the conscience of the message, which is, are we ready to change? Which I believe we are. We're the chosen ones who can change the times that we're in. We just have to figure out constructive ways of speaking across different sectors, which is one of the things that I really enjoy about being at the Aspen Ideas Festival. The collaboration is paramount, and there's nothing that I've seen quite like it. This is one movement of that symphony that I premiered partially at the Aspen Ideas Festival. This is one movement that I'm concerned with right now. I'm working on finding a way to blend the themes together in a way that's cohesive and builds the narrative. That will be being played by the tubular bells. Boom, 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 boom. The timpani drums would come. And then the theme. a theme stylistically in the style of Native American, Indigenous American chants. Blended with the blues, the black idiom of the blues. The blues being a universal language, the basis of lots of different music globally. This style of music that I'm composing in this symphony is something that I've never heard before, and I think that it's what Albert Murray was referring to when he said the omni-American is the quintessential American. That's the direction that we're going, and the world is ready for it now more than ever. I thank you so much for joining me as I muse on all of these different topics, and I hope to continue to join you in person in the years to come. Thank you very much. My name is John Baptiste, and I will see you later.
Join us again tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as we have Bill Gates in conversation with Stephanie Mehta, Anna DeVere Smith, Yuval Sharon and Kate Levin, Madeline Albright and Nick Burns, additional big ideas, and a phenomenal presentation by the Aspen Santa Fe Ballet. The Aspen Ideas Festival is generously underwritten by Allstate, the Mount Sinai Health System, Prudential, and the Walton Family Foundation, with support from PayPal and the Rise Fund.